Hey everyone, new moon in Gemini. It actually just kicked in 40 minutes ago, so I'm a little bit late in uh, speaking to it, but then again, not really because this is a new moon, right? It's a new cycle. New cycle, meaning it's birthed now, but the cycle itself will unfold over the next 4 weeks. It's always the case with every new moon. So this new moon is in Gemini, pretty much right on Prince's sun, Trine Pluto, which is fortunate. And also, it happens to be sitting at the midpoint of the Saturn-Neptune conjunction in Aries, and that is probably the most crucial point. And it's really not an easy configuration. Um, but of course, it always comes down to our own self and whatever's going on in our life circumstances and the choices that we make accordingly. The new moon is also conjunct Mercury, which is extremely interesting because a couple of days after the new moon, what happens is Mercury is reborn as an evening star. That is basically termed as a cazimi. You might have heard that term. It's the Sun conjunct with Mercury in this case, right? So a Sun-Mercury conjunction, which occurs multiple times throughout the year, more than any other planet, of course, because Mercury is the closest planet to the Sun. So the frequency is much higher versus other planets. Nevertheless, when Mercury changes his face from meaning morning star to evening star, there are different characteristics and different divinities associated with Mercury as a morning star or as an evening star. In this case, he will be reborn, he, she, they, whatever, will be reborn as an evening star. The evening star is said to correspond to the divinity known as Hermes. Hermes is definitely an archetype and divinity that really sees the bigger picture in all the information that he's gathering. That's what Mercury does. It gathers information and then it just delivers it everywhere. So Mercury's presence in this new moon is one of the most important themes, given that Mercury is the ruler of the new moon, as the new moon is in Gemini. Now, Gemini is one of the trickiest signs because it's ruled by Mercury, of course, and Mercury, of course, was the trickster. One thing I want to say before I continue, truth is so important and it always finds its way. It always finds its way. There is nothing or no one in this material existence or outside forces of this material existence who may try and penetrate through to obscure the truth. Ultimately, no one can. The truth has its own stream, has its own path, and it always finds its own way. And when someone or something is in denial of that truth by resisting it and pushing it further and further away, well, the truth will just find another stream to come through, one way or another at one point in time. So let me just show you a couple of things here as I continue to speak. First of all, let me just show you what's happening in the sky relative to the Babylonian chart or the Babylonian zodiac, which is we're still looking at the same thing except we've taken everything back about 23 degrees. Whether we're looking at the tropical zodiac or the Babylonian zodiac, Mercury is still going to form a conjunction to the sun, right? A couple of days after the new moon. You can see it all here. There's the moon, which is blacked out, as it were, highlighted in gray, which means it's invisible because it's conjunct the sun. And when the moon is conjunct the sun, we cannot see it. Okay? So any planet that forms a conjunction to the sun cannot be seen. There are exceptions, of course, as I've mentioned with Venus, who was reborn as a morning star recently and in various northern latitudes did not go invisible, which is a phenomenon that only occurs once every 8 years, not all around the globe. So it's quite a special thing, as I've said, I don't know how many times. So when we're looking at this picture here, um, we've got a sun-moon conjunction and we've got Mercury over here. You can see Mercury is invisible because Mercury is so close to the sun, so it cannot be seen. A couple of days after this, and I'll actually show you. Well, first of all, Mercury forms the conjunction to the sun, becomes an evening star. That's literally a rebirth for the journey of where Mercury is tracking the zodiac. Whether you're looking at Babylonian or tropical, doesn't matter. It's still Mercury doing the same thing. So what happens is the evening star occurs, but Mercury takes a little while to actually become visible again. And so I'd just like to show you when that happens. So I'm going to animate the chart and I'm going to step by one day at a time just so that we can see when Mercury does become visible, because that is going to be an important day. So let's just proceed forward and see when that happens. We're into June now, June 3rd. Okay. I'm just animating one day at a time until I see, there it is. See, Mercury is now blue. Relative to this program and the way it's structured, when a planet is invisible, it's shaded out in gray. When it becomes visible again, it will be the color that it's supposed to be. In this case, it's reflected by the color blue. So what is that date? Isn't that fucking interesting? It's the day of Prince's birthday, 7th of June. So just to recap, before I go further into the new moon, because the new moon is conjunct Mercury and Mercury rules the new moon, it is very important to pay attention to where Mercury is and what Mercury is doing. Mercury is in its own rulership, Gemini, so it's incredibly powerful. It's incredibly dignified. It's in its rulership position. It's like the king in his own home. Mercury forms a conjunction to the sun a couple of days after the new moon and is reborn as an evening star, who is Hermes. Hermes has a broader vision. So if you think about it like this, when Mercury is a morning star, he is Apollo, and he's the truth and the light. And in that truth and light, he's still gathering information. But with the morning stars, a lot of it is very, you could say, very internalized. It's very close to us because Mercury as a morning star means Mercury is retrograde. Okay. Just like when Venus is retrograde, she's a morning star. When planets are retrograde, they are closest to the Earth, closest to us. So there can be something very subjective about the nature of that planet, that archetype, and what's going on. But outside of the perhaps subjectivity, it's also a very inward process relative to what we are experiencing, and in this case, Mercury, what we are gathering. So there's a gathering of information and data that can just be our own realizations relative to certain, streams of thought that we've had, ideas we've had, things we've been thinking about with certain communications we've had, certain dialogues we've had. That now that could be good, bad, ugly, or indifferent, doesn't matter. It's because it's going to be all of that. The point is that as Mercury now, just after the new moon, being the ruler of the new moon, is reborn into his evening star phase, everything that he's been sort of gathering, if you like, while he was the morning star Apollo, truth, light, all that data, all that learning, all that information is now ready to be brought forward with a much larger scope of vision and intuition as well. A lot of wisdom. So what I'm suggesting is that when Mercury becomes visible, which is the 7th of June, there's something quite uh, there's going to be something quite revealing that comes out of this Mercury visibility as the evening star. And obviously, that's going to depend on your own circumstances relative to what that means. You just bring it back to yourself, you bring it back to your own circumstances, and you bring it back to your own birth chart. Where is transiting Mercury in your birth chart? Where is Gemini in your birth chart? That's the zone, that's the area he's tracking, right? That's where he's being reborn as an evening star, coming through with wisdom, foresight, and insight from a much broader scope, right? And ready to communicate it, ready to disseminate, ready to disperse that information, whatever it is. Um, so that's one very important thing about what's happening relative to this new moon in Gemini. Now let's go to the solar fire version of the tropical zodiac. Okay. So this is probably what most of you are paying attention to. Now, the new moon happens at 6 degrees of Gemini. As you can see, there's the sun and moon together in a conjunction, which is what a new moon is. You can see that Mercury is just trailing behind the new moon at 2 degrees of Gemini. And as I said, this new moon occurs 26th or 27th, depending if you are in the northern or southern hemisphere. This is southern hemisphere based. Sorry, 27th. Yeah, that's right, 26th or 27th of May. And a couple of days later, I think it's on the 29th, when Mercury forms the conjunction to the Sun, the cazimi. Cazimi means in the heart of the Sun. So when Mercury forms the conjunction to the Sun, there's a rebirth that occurs. Mercury is invisible at the moment and has been for a little while, will still be invisible when it forms a conjunction to the Sun, will still be invisible until the 7th of June. When Mercury becomes visible, then some new light will come to very specific information that's going to be across the board for everyone and the whole world in different ways. So just watch that date, 7th of June. That's going to be quite telling and quite profound. Um, now, as I said, Mercury forms a trine, pardon me, well, Mercury, yes, is also forming a trine to Pluto, of course, but the new moon is forming a trine to Pluto. And I think the fact that Pluto is forming a trine to the Sun, Moon, and Mercury, uh, Pluto again is really corresponds to digging up um, the dirt, so to speak. You know, it just reveals uh, content, intentions, motivations, desires, all sorts of things like that that perhaps have been hidden. Now, in some cases, that can be, you know, in a sinister fashion, and in other cases, it's merely just our own internal process of things that have been just, you know, churning over within us, right, until they are ready to be brought to a new cycle, a new beginning, which is the new moon. And in this case, it's got very, very much to do with our thoughts, our communications across the board, and also agreements, you know, could be agreements that we have made or are in the process of making or are thinking about making. Now, Pluto can help in this because it's forming a trine, and a trine aspect brings in a level of grace, a level of ease of some kind. It supports what's trying to be born here. The birth is the new moon with the conjunction to Mercury, meaning ideas, information. Now that you know, that could be legal information that comes up in Diddy's court case, for example, right? In your own personal life, again, you know, it just depends where this is happening in your birth chart and what's happening in your life circumstances. But the point is that there's a brand new seed that is germinating, right, with this new moon, and that is supported by the trine to Pluto, right, in order to evolve, which is a great word for Pluto, or just open up and flourish over the next 4 weeks relative to this new moon cycle. Now, in 2 weeks' time, when we have a full moon, things are going to, there's going to be other elements involved, but we'll talk about that when we get closer to the full moon. We'll just kind of stick to this new moon picture for now. So Pluto, it can support things, but Pluto also does correspond to endings and death and rebirth. So even though it's a trine, it doesn't take out the element of what Pluto fundamentally speaks to and represents, which is transformation, rebirth, death, and also bringing up things that have been hidden, lying dormant. As I said, whether that's from a sinister level, or whether that's just from an innocent level relative to our own inner processes and things that we have been reflecting upon. Okay. But trine means that the transformation that can occur here, the death of something and rebirth of something else, can feel can feel a little bit easier with the trine of Pluto to this new cycle, because the death and rebirth of old information and new information data coming through is being supported by the Lord of the Underworld, who holds all secrets. So the transformation and death is going to occur, but it's going to be perhaps experienced a little bit easier because the universe is literally saying this process needs to happen, this information needs to come out, and we need to have it happen gracefully, and this process needs to be supported so that it actually finds its way out. As I said, the truth always finds its way out. The difficult thing about this new moon, and it is difficult, it doesn't matter which way you look at it, but there are good things about it as well to an extent. It depends how we utilize the power of Pluto here. Right at the midpoint of the new moon and Pluto are Saturn, Neptune, and Ceres. Those three, which are in a triple conjunction at the moment in Aries. Now, Saturn just entered Aries, what was it, a couple of days ago? And it is conjunct Neptune, even though the exact conjunction doesn't occur until February next year. That is, they will both be at 0 degrees, which is a world degree. That's going to be the absolute epitome of new era, completely starting at that point. Although nothing completely starts just at one point. There's always a backstory and there's always an accumulation of things that have been going on, right? That ultimately end up leading to a point that we identify as a new beginning. But that new beginning comes from some type of ending, doesn't it? No beginning comes from nothing. So Saturn and Neptune are so potent in this picture and so close, and so is Ceres. And this is a very delicate and a very difficult combination, Saturn, Neptune, Ceres. Predominantly because Saturn and Ceres both speak to some type of severing or separation. And Neptune there is the element of huge disappointment. Huge disappointment. Because, like I've always said, uh, you know, the hardest goodbye is saying goodbye to an illusion. And that's what Neptune is going to point to here. It's this little trio is literally bringing up whatever lies and illusions have been surfacing and are still connected to some backstory. Now, that backstory could be something in your life that's quite recent, or it could be something that's super old. It depends where this is happening in your birth chart as well. And also, with Saturn, quite apart from it representing separation and severing, um, it also corresponds to karma. It really does. It corresponds to, the things that we are doing at any moment, past life, present, whatever. So Saturn, literally Saturn is that doorway that shows us, what we've sown, what we've created, for better or for worse. We just have to be able to be honest, and really recognize what's been shown to us for our own growth, right? But is it going to be an easy passage? Absolutely not, because Ceres is there especially. That brings in a much more painful experience, perhaps, for some people, because Ceres ultimately, or perhaps I should say, initially, her presence always brings up some kind of loss and grief. Yes, ultimately, she can bring through what we call renewal and transformation. So she's another symbol, just like Pluto, for renewal and transformation, but not without going through the door of grief and loss first. We can't bypass that door when Ceres is there. Something is going to be grieved here in this picture. And it's going to depend on your circumstances as to what that speaks to. Now, this is called a midpoint structure, basically, right? So Saturn, Neptune, and Ceres are at the midpoint of Moon Pluto. And that's very important because why is this midpoint important? Because Pluto's trine the new moon. So I saw it visually before I actually looked at the mathematical calculation for it, because naturally, after so many years of looking at the zodiac and charts and whatever, I've got a reasonably good trained eye to pick up these things without going into, midpoint reports and listings and whatever. As soon as I saw this, I could see that this little trio mob here was at the midpoint of this new moon. And I thought, okay, well, that's a fucking problem. To be honest, that was my first thought. I thought, this is a problem. This is difficult. But I guess, growth doesn't, it rarely comes through with much joy, does it? So I'm going to read you what Everton, so this is called The Combination of Stellar Influences, just in case any of you are interested. This whole book is on midpoint structures, of the meaning of various midpoints. And as I've often said when I bring up this book, this was written back in the 1940s, I think, sometime, by a German guy who, yes, has quite a bleak perspective. But even though it's bleak, unfortunately, pretty much he just nails it, with what he has identified. So, what he says about having Saturn between the Sun and Pluto. Ruthless overcoming of obstacles and difficulties, physical impediment, restriction, separation by, in brackets, by higher power, comma, and then the word imprisonment, close bracket. It's pretty bleak, isn't it, really? Now, naturally, the interpretation of that will vary and be reflected very differently in every single person's story, because everyone is experiencing a different story. Then what he says about Neptune being at the middle of the Sun and Pluto. He says impediments in physical or mental development, sensitiveness and impressionability of a high degree, lack of vigor, the undermining of health or a vocational position, martyrdom. And you could pause and just write down those comments that I made, because you could literally just um, you can just pick a word out of those sentences, and you may find that just one word describes what this cycle can potentially reflect for you or for others that you know, and so forth, because you may be in a position where you're trying to help others, whether that's, through doing readings or whatever it is you may be doing. It is always very, very useful to talk about, to bring to conscious awareness, what's there, because we can't change what's there, we can't block what's there, but we can become aware of it in order to deal with it in the best possible way so that we can get the best possible outcome. Even if it's an extremely difficult situation, we still want to try and get the best result, right? Just for our own sanity or our own well-being, or just identifying, yes, there are certain things that we may just need to completely stop doing, completely sever. Now, Saturn is the greater malefic if you're born at night. So I want to say that people born at night perhaps will be experiencing this a lot more, that there'll be just some element of this story that would be more potent for night births. This night birth, day birth business is such a big deal. It was to the ancients. It came through in Hellenistic astrology very, very strongly. And it's been, revived by various astrologers over the years and decades and so forth. And I highly urge you and encourage you to really be aware of the difference between a day chart and a night chart, and knowing your greater malefic and greater benefic and so forth, because it tells the fucking story of your life. It really does. There's no two ways about it. So overall, a pretty possibly a pretty difficult cycle for certain individuals, where the backstory of their life circumstances, it just gets hooked into this and somehow gets magnified. But, like I said, there is potential there for an ease and a grace of finally being able to either come to terms with something, or yeah, come to terms with it and be able to just let it go, to just release it, because it might be that you just have no choice for some reason, as it appears. We always have a choice, but the choice that we have is in how we respond, right? And how we deal with matters. We don't have a choice in what shows up in the sky. That's, that's just the phenomena of the cosmos, of the stars, of the planets, of, you know, of the collective unconscious, all those elements, right? Just playing out, just unfolding. You can't say there's no new moon, on the 27th of May because you don't believe in it. The fact is that it's there. So it's a similar thing when we are looking at maybe a difficult cycle coming up. It's not just, about sort of feeling disheartened or defeated because there are some difficult things there to contend with, but rather it's a lot more useful, I think, to be aware of what's there so that you can respond in the most appropriate manner that's going to serve what's really important to you. And just the ability to be honest, I think, is a huge factor here, because Gemini does have a tendency to tell a few fibs. It's the trickster. Think about one of the stories about Mercury, which was he stole Apollo's cattle, right? Apollo, the sun god, which is him. Mercury is Apollo. Anyway, in the story, he stole his cattle, and it is said that he went back to he walked backwards, which is Mercury retrograde, and just kind of covered all his tracks so that he so that he didn't get caught, right, for stealing Apollo's cattle. And he did get caught, and then he tried to make it up to Apollo. And Mercury, as a youngster, which Mercury is always a youngster, um, he was so witty and so intelligent and so clever that because Zeus is the one that would bring in punishment and make decisions around what the divinities were doing and not doing. And when they were playing the game wrong, he'd have to pull them up. But he was just so impressed by just how clever Mercury was that he decided not to punish him, but he gave him an opportunity to make it up to Apollo. And so what he did was he created that instrument called a lyre. No pun intended. So you see, Mercury is an incredibly tricky guy. So when Mercury, Gemini, when that part of the sky is speaking, vibrating, the matters that can come up can be multiple levels and layers, and very divided perspectives or views or visions or understanding or very divided beliefs about something. Now, that could be between you and another person. They're not capable of seeing what you're telling them. You're shining. Look, when you shine the light, when you shine the light of truth onto something, in most cases, it's not received. In most cases, it's not welcomed. That's why we live in such a state of this reality. That's why it's so fucked up, so messed up, because people don't like the truth. There's only a small minority really that end up shining the truth in big collective theme matters, but then bringing it back just to our own personal life, even in our own personal circumstances, we all don't like the truth to be sort of pointed out to us, especially if we have ourselves invested in the opposite of what's being shown to us. Why would you accept that truth, that light, when you are so invested in the complete opposite narrative? So it's very, very tricky energy. And I think the key with Mercury becoming an evening star is the invitation is because when the sun conjuncts Mercury, it's a rebirth of Mercury's interaction. And his interaction is going to come through his voice. Our voice is going to be spoken through the god Hermes, who has, ineffable wisdom, unfathomable wisdom, infinite wisdom. And that wisdom is, it's a huge expanded sort of view on all this data, information, communication, things that have been happening, right, in your life story with could be with a person, it could be with everyone. It just depends. Um, the other thing that I think is probably worth mentioning as well is that even though Uranus is in Taurus, Uranus is very close to Mercury and, well, reasonably close to the new moon. So Uranus too has something to add to this new moon story. Now, Uranus is a bit of a wild card. It always brings up what we didn't fucking expect. It brings up the unpredictable. So I think it's important to keep that in mind as well. This Uranus could create breakthroughs, or it could create some pretty difficult shocks that people just are not ready, can't handle, can't cope with. It's too much for them, so on and so forth. It depends on the narrative of your life circumstances and what you are dealing with. Also, I just want to say with the Saturn, Neptune, and especially Saturn being at zero here, um, The thing is, both Saturn and Neptune will go back into Pisces one more time. And so even though there's this um, sense of like a new passage that's opened, a new chapter that's uh, birthing itself, Neptune, Saturn in Aries, it hasn't reached its point of no return, you know. It's because Saturn and Neptune are both going to go back into Pisces. So even though what I'm trying to say is that there might be this burning kind of desire or urge, right, to push forward in something. But in certain circumstances and certain situations and people's storylines, it might be you can't do that just yet. You can dream it up, Neptune. You can recognize the reality, Saturn, and understand that you have to work with those two dimensions very carefully and very closely because they are forming this miraculous conjunction at zero Aries, which hasn't happened for centuries. You know, it's like the Immaculate Conception. It's a really big deal. But they will not do that until February 2026. So even though they're both into Aries at the moment, they are just kind of literally just making their way in, right? Just slowly making their way in. And then they're going to get pulled back into Pisces, which is the last sign of the zodiac, the end of the wheel. And it is that part of the story in our life where we finally completely have to, in no uncertain terms, finish certain things. That could be with certain people or certain aspects of our lives and so on and so forth. Again, it depends. It depends on you, where you are in your life, how old you are, you know, where this is happening in your chart, you know, your history, you know, all these factors are unique for every single one of us, and therefore we'll have a unique expression through this new moon cycle, right? Um, let me think. Was there anything else that I wanted to add to this? Yeah, Venus is approaching her conjunction to Chiron, and I've spoken about that already, but this, you know, this is in the picture as well, right? Just in that Venus is so close to Chiron in this new moon. So, you know, I really feel that this energy with the Saturn-Neptune series and then Venus and Chiron is a backstory, right? Connecting to everything having been in Pisces, you know, Venus and Neptune and Saturn all in Pisces just recently. The North Node, of course, is still there. And the fact that Saturn and Neptune have to revisit Pisces one more time. So there's still some loose ends that haven't been cleaned up yet. And I think this new moon is presenting perhaps a new level of understanding, a new level of insight, whether that's through your own inner realization or whether that's through information that lands in your hands, so to speak. However it comes to you, it comes. It's different for all of us, but whatever it is that does unfold over this next 4 week period through this new moon, the information that comes to you is going to be very, very important for part of what we are releasing and clearing relative to Neptune and Saturn ultimately going back into Pisces one more time. So this is a cycle of really having the courage to speak the truth. Um, I guess even when people don't like it and they may want to slam you down or cut you off or shut you down or whatever it is, I guess for me that's a really important issue because I've always had this thing about truth since I was born. I remember when I was a little kid and I would notice people lying, I used to get really angry about that, really angry. It just used to trigger me big time. And that's, reflected through the configuration of everything in my birth chart. I've got Mercury in Aries, I'm a Venus morning star, I've got a strong Pallas Athena, it on and on and on and on it goes. So that the and strong Uranus and Moon in Aquarius and Aquarius rising and I've got all the typical sort of signatures, if you like, that would describe perhaps an individual that would be a seeker of truth, and I really value truth more than anything else. And the opposite to that just really, it really affects me. It really affects me. That's why I continue to speak on controversial sort of themes or things that people don't like to hear, because I'm not here to win votes. I'm not here to be this plastic, robotic person so that I can get more numbers on my channel. When you walk the path of having your motivation and desire is to try and do your best to speak the truth through the language of the stars, and that you realize that the most important the most important thing that we need to be okay with in our heart is our connection to the source first and foremost. Everything else is secondary. But even though it's secondary, it doesn't make it less important, because that secondary part is our human life here on earth, right? And it's what we chose to evolve through, to learn through, and to grow through. So there's no wrong or right in any of it, but it's also about becoming more aware as we continue, right? To turn a page over and start fresh, or just learn from our mistakes or whatever it may be, you know. But truth is very, very important to me. That's fundamentally all I was trying to get to with that point. And truth always rocks the boat. And you have to be pretty, you have to be pretty heroic. You really do, to have the balls to come out and just call a spade, because you will get shut down, and you have to be able to stand back up again. I was roller skating the other day, which I hadn't done for ages, and I fell flat on my ass. And I thought I was just giggling at myself. I was laughing because I thought, this is life. You fall and you fucking get back up. You get back on the horse. So truth is very, very important, and truth always finds its way, and truth always prevails, no matter what. And I admire people that have the courage to speak the truth, regardless of the consequences, versus the opposite to that, which would be lying, manipulating, having sinister, malicious intentions, and so on and so forth. Projecting, you know, goes on and on and on. Okay, I'm going to sign off, and I'm going to get on with this day, which is quite dreary out there for us here in the Southern Hemisphere. We are in autumn, and it is pretty kind of chilly at the moment. Um, Let me know what you think. Let me know what your thoughts are, and how you're traveling, and if you relate to some of the themes that I've shared with you today. And I will see you soon with more truth. Yep, with more truth.